On today's episode, John Truby's 7 Steps to Story Structure. John Truby is a screenwriter, director, and screenwriting teacher. He has served as a consultant on over 1,000 film scripts over the past 3 decades. Truby has created what he calls his 7 stages. On this episode, we will talk about Truby's 7 stages, and hopefully you will learn to use them to make your story that much more interesting. Let's get started. Step 1, weakness need. To understand plot, you must start by figuring out your values, or the right or wrong things you believe in. You will create a character that will have a weakness that is holding him or her back, and it might be a weakness that will teach people about the issues you are passionate about. You see, a character needs to have one or more serious flaws, usually internal, that are so severe they are ruining the character's life. Now, this weakness will create needs that are sought out in the story. Need is what the character must do in order to grow, usually in a positive way. And that growth will help the character with his or her weakness. And usually we learn a lesson about the character's values, and so we learn about your values. In good stories, this weakness need is not only psychological, it is also moral. From the very first page, our hero has one or more problems that he or she is dealing with. And the character knows the problem but does not know how to solve it. If it is a psychological weakness and need, it will be simple and personal and have no effect on other people. But if you create a moral need, that will have an effect on other people. A character with a moral need has to learn how to act properly by the end of the story. Many times, this is selfishness, and the character must learn how to overcome this selfishness by the end of the story. Remember, the character cannot be aware of the weakness and need. The moment the character realizes the weakness need, the story's over, and that's what we're building to. For example, the weakness in the movie Vertigo is his vertigo. So he needs to overcome that vertigo. Get it? Figure out the weakness and let that determine what the character needs. And by the end of the story, the character will solve that weakness need. Complex characters have multiple weaknesses, and simple characters usually have one. Step 2, desire. Desire is what the character wants in the story. This is a goal that the audience recognizes right away. This is always physical. If I have a serious drinking problem, for example, and I say I really need a drink, that is a desire. I am trying to get a drink, and this will inform my weakness need. The need is to stop drinking so that life is made better. But the character has a weakness and is unaware of how the drinking is affecting his or her life. This weakness need should be solved after the character gets or doesn't get the desire. Remember vertigo? The weakness in vertigo is his vertigo, so he needs to overcome that vertigo. But at the beginning of the movie, the character's friend brings him a mystery, so the desire becomes for him to solve that mystery. That mystery will lead to a solution of his need, the vertigo. And by solving that, he will solve his weakness need. The goal created by the desire is always outside of the character. So, in other words, once he solves the mystery, he will find some sort of solution to his weakness need. These steps are always the most important of the story, and they need to be accomplished right away. You see them in every movie. For example, in The Godfather, his need is to avoid being a ruthless character, but his desire is to take revenge on his father's shooters. In Batman Begins, his need is to comfort his fear and guilt from destroying him, but his desire is to stop the crime from destroying his city. In Star Wars, his need is to embrace his destiny, but his desire is to rescue the princess. Step 3, opponent. The opponent is not the bad guy. That's the first thing you need to know. This is a common misunderstanding. The opponent is the person who wants to prevent the character from reaching his or her goal. And the opponent usually has a link to the main character's desire. To create a good opponent, the opponent should generally want the same thing as the main character. This will force the two characters to interact. If you believe that an opponent does not have the same goal, maybe that's a weakness in your story, or maybe you have to look a little deeper. For example, you have a 15-year-old daughter who wants to go on a date with Billy. You say no. Are you both competing over Billy? No. You are fighting over power. You see, your daughter wants to control who she hangs out with, and you want to remain in control. And in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy wants to go home. And the witch, well, she wants her sister's shoes, which will ultimately help Dorothy go home. But she doesn't know that yet. Both of these issues are a struggle to reconnect with family. You see, as a story writer, you must figure out the most important thing that your characters will fight over. And this will become the spine of the story. Step 4, the plan. The plan is the longest part of the story, and it is filled with a series of actions and reversals. This is a set of guidelines and strategies that a character uses to defeat the opponent and achieve the goal. The initial plan that the hero comes up with never works. It always fails. And in the early and middle part of any story, the opponent is always superior. This always forces the hero to go back to the drawing board, rethink the plan, and come back stronger. The opponent also usually comes up with a plan to defeat the character, and we may see glimpses of this through your story. This part of the movie is always the longest part. In fact, if you've watched other Be the Teachers, you know that a character tries something to solve his or her problem, it goes wrong, and the character adjusts. Just to try something again, to see it go wrong, etc., etc., etc. Step 5, the battle. Now, this is the final conflict and the biggest conflict. This is the ultimate test for your hero. As a result of the plan, your hero will be at his or her lowest point, but the character will commit to one last attempt or battle. Usually the hero wins, but not always. And whatever final battle plan the character comes up with, it will always go wrong. In other words, Luke Skywalker plans to go to Cloud City to kick Darth Vader's butt and save his friends. Never does he say, "Hey, Yoda, I am going to go to the Cloud City, fight Vader, get my hand cut off, and find out that Vader is..." Well, you have to watch the movie if you don't know that part. My point is, there is a battle, and it always goes wrong. Step 6, the self-revelation. The moment where the hero realizes that the battle plan is going differently than he or she thought is actually really important. This moment is so intense that the hero will get a self-revelation. When it all goes wrong, the hero learns a new piece of information about him or herself. This is the moment where the hero fulfills the original need. If your character has a moral or psychological need, this revelation will be both psychological and moral. You see, this is the moment when the character realizes that he or she has been acting wrong, and the character learns the proper way to act. And remember that a psychological flaw usually comes out of a moral flaw. Usually the skewed morality causes a psychological defect, and this moment is the moment when the character will solve it. In other words, the character has a deep Oprah or a Dr. Phil revelation about how he or she was wrong, and now the character knows what has to happen for him or her to become a better person. You see, the self-revelation is that moment where the character will get or not get his or her desire, and as a result, will solve the weakness need and learn something about him or herself. Step 7, the new equilibrium. You have reached the end of the story, and everything is back to normal. Well, sort of. There is one big change. The hero is at a higher or lower level based on a self-revelation. If the self-revelation is positive, the hero grows. For the audience, an audience sees it as permanent. If the self-revelation is negative, the hero is destroyed. Now, most sellable scripts have the hero rise. It is more difficult to sell the other, the one where the main character is lower, unless the lower ending is justified. We basically get to see the final effect the adventure has on the character, and this can last anywhere from 5 seconds to 5 minutes, or even longer. So you have learned about so much. You learned all 7 stages. You learned about the weakness need, the desire. You learned about the opponent and the character's plan to take on that opponent. You learned about the battle the character finally takes at the climax and the self-revelation that occurs. The most important step is that self-revelation. That's the thing the audience is most interested in, even if he or she doesn't know. You see, they just sat through the entire plan and battle, and they want to know, how has the hero changed after going through this revelation? These 7 steps exist in almost every story. And a person will go through this process in their everyday life. Stories are attractive because this is the order. It's organic. It's part of our actual life. 7 steps are the DNA of your story, and if you get them right, you will create a successful story. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Be the Teacher, and have fun creating your successful story.